Hey friends, today we're going to be talking about texture. Now there are two different types of texture. One is physical, that's how something feels. Those are things that we touch every day and we know exactly how that thing feels. But another type of texture is visual, and this is important in art because it's how we make something look like it feels a certain way. So in a picture, we know what that object is, even though we cannot actually touch it. So for example, we know that a chip bag is crinkly, or we know that yarn is very soft. And we can see that there's a difference between these textures, but how do we get that on our paper? And the answer is that we use lines. So lines help us create texture. If we want something to be soft and fluffy, like our yarn, we can use scalloped lines to make it look like there's lots of little bumps. If we want something to look sharp or jagged, we can use lots of pointy lines like upside down V's and jagged lines. If we want something to look wrinkled or crinkled like our chip bag, we can use all of these random straight lines or bumpy lines to make it look like there's crinkles in the material. If something is smooth, there's not really a lot of lines that we can put on it except for adding highlights. For example, if we look at a plastic ball, there's not really any lines on it that tell us that it's smooth, but we know it's smooth because it's got the highlights from my lights on it. So when we have something smooth, we add lines to make our highlights, so we know that it feels that way. So for our project, we are going to be drawing succulents. And we just talked about succulents, but what that means is we have to look at the texture of plants. And the types of plants we're talking about can come in different types of textures. So this is a cactus, and we know that it's pointy because it has all of these little spines that are very sharp. So when we draw it, we can use V lines or just straight lines that make it look like there are spines all over our cactus. Over here we have a jade tree. It's also a succulent, but it has very smooth leaves, and it's got all of the little highlight lines on it. So if you were to draw this, you would draw lots of leaves on a stem and add lines for highlights. That's how we can see the texture. But that's not the only thing that's important. There's also dirt. Our plants always live in some kind of dirt. So to make this texture, we have little shapes or bumps that make it look like our cactus is living in soil. So when we're drawing succulents, they can look a lot of different ways. There are the cacti that we usually think of when we think of plants that live in the desert or dry environments. But there's also lots of different types of plants. Plants that can be very smooth and tall. Plants that can hang over the side of a planter like a bunch of grapes. Plants that are super tall and pointy. Plants that have spikes on the outside of their leaves. Plants that have pointy leaves. Plants that kind of grow into like a flower shape. There's lots of different types of succulents that you can draw that have different textures. But we also have our cacti, and these are very, very cool because they can look lots of different ways. And we know that cacti are pointy, but their points can also look different too. You can have single points, you can have double points, you can have X's, you can have groups of points, and they go on the cactus lots of different ways. So here, if I wanted to make this cactus look pointy, I might use single points. And the points aren't just off to the side. They are all over that cactus. That whole thing is pokey. So we want spines that come off of the cactus and are all up inside of that cactus. All right. What about this one? Sometimes cactus have ridges. So they have lines that come all the way down from the top to the bottom, and that's where their spikes are. So maybe I'll put my X's on this one. But I can't put an X over here, so I put like a V, so it's coming out of my cactus. So this cactus has its own special type of points. I'll finish that in a second. Sometimes cactus have ridges that are bumpy, just like the outside of the cactus. And on these ridges are also different types of spikes. You can have them going in different directions. So these might have spines going this way, but then this one might have spikes going this way because the ridges make them go in different directions. And you can kind of space them out, keep some together, some far apart, totally up to you. And don't forget to have them going off of your cactus as well. Sometimes you have cactus that have different groupings. So some have stuff that grows off of them. Sometimes you have cactus that grow all together. And these also have their own types of spikes. So you have lots of options when you're drawing your cactus to figure out how you want your cactus to look, what spines they have, what group they're in, how they look, or even if they have flowers on top, because some cactus do make flowers. So when you are drawing your succulents, I'm going to show you how to draw your pot and how to make it look like there's lots of succulents in your pot, but you get to choose what succulents you want in your picture. So today we're going to be drawing a pot full of different types of cacti and succulents that's going to be using a lot of overlapping. And overlapping is a way for us to draw things so it looks like the shapes are in front of or on top of each other instead of looking see-through. And if you look at these two pictures, the difference is that these squares have all of their lines intact, so it looks like they're clear. You can see all of the edges of the squares. But over here, it looks like this square is in front of the others and this square is behind both of them, because you don't have the extra lines of the squares. They look like they're behind each other. You also have, in art, foreground, which is the very closest thing to you, middle ground, some things right behind your first thing, and your background, the elements that are super far away. So they might be smaller or lighter, and they're way back behind. So you have different things that are closer to you or farther away from you. So when we do our picture, the first thing that's super close in front of us is going to be our pot. So we're going to draw a really big U. It's kind of flat on the bottom. Then we want to draw an oval. So that's the opening of our pot. And the very first overlapping we're going to do is drawing the table that our pot is sitting on. We're going to draw a line from the edge of our paper to our pot, and we're going to pretend like that line continues through our pot to the other side. Now we do this a lot in art so that it shows us that our pot is actually sitting on something and not floating in space. But now we're going to start to draw the cacti inside the pot. So we're going to start inside the pot. I'm going to draw my first cactus by drawing an upside down U. And I want to make it look like it's sitting in dirt. So I'm going to make this bumpy line at the bottom. But this looks see-through because I can see my line through there. So I'm going to take my eraser and erase that line that I drew for my pot. So now it looks like my cactus is sitting inside of that pot. Now I'm going to draw another one. Maybe I'll draw one that has all of these cool little growths on it. And I also need to make sure it looks like it's sitting in soil. And I need to erase that line again. So now I have 2 cacti. Now I'm going to add other succulents that I might like to see in here. So maybe I have one that's like super grown up around itself like this. And maybe it sits just inside the pot. Now I have all of these lines inside of that succulent I just drew that I have to erase. So it looks like that succulent is sitting right in front of my big cactus. So you have to pay attention to where you need to erase a line and where you need to keep a line. Because I want to keep that little teeny tiny line in between my leaves so it still looks like that cactus is behind my succulent. All right. Maybe we'll do a little cactus family right here. Give them a bumpy line. So it does erase the bottom of my line that I just drew, but that's okay. All right. Now it's time for me to add my details. So on my cactus, I got to figure out how I want to add my prickles. So on this one, I think I'm just going to add little single spikes all over my cactus. You got to put them all over all of the parts of your cactus. And you see how I'm kind of going fast. And when you go fast, you have a line that's kind of thicker at the bottom and sharper at the end because you're picking up your pencil as you are finishing that line and it makes more of a point. Maybe on this one I have some ridges. And I have my prickles sitting on top. All right. We also want to make sure it looks like that the dirt isn't just underneath our cactus. It's also back here. And you can do this by drawing shapes like little circles, or you can have little random bumpy lines. So it looks like there's the texture of that dirt right inside of the pot. All right. So if you guys would like to, you can add other details on your background like a sun or other plants that are way back there. But otherwise, we'll just have that as an empty background. On our table, you can add some stuff, but we're going to add a cool texture to it later. But inside of our pot, we're going to make something super cool, which I'm going to tell you about right now. So in our drawing, most of it is going to be super colorful. We're going to color our cactus, we're going to color our background, we're going to color our table. But our pot, I want to have some contrast. Contrast means being significantly different from something, or something that is super duper apart from each other. So colors. There are colors that are complementary, but it means that they're super far apart on the color wheel. So yellow and purple, red and green, orange and blue. They have a lot of contrast together. You can have contrast in size. A super teeny tiny person in front of a huge mountain. That's a big difference. Shapes. You can have a super pointy geometric shape in a field of circles. that pointy shape looks super different from all of the other organic shapes. Texture. You can have something fluffy in the middle of something super spiky. That is something that's very different from its surroundings. So another way to do contrast is to have very black and very white. This is an example of a cactus paper that I did at my other school, and I made my pot in super black and white patterns. I chose what patterns I wanted to, what parts of my pattern I wanted to color in with a Sharpie and what parts I wanted to leave white so that it looks very different from each other in my pattern. So that's what I want you guys to do. We're going to pick patterns that we can make very contrasted. Okay, so there'll be pieces that'll be super dark and pieces that are super light. And do you see how I separated them out into sections? So on your pot, you're going to decide whether you want to have sections going up and down, sections that go across and down, totally up to you. I think I'm going to do something like this because I think it looks really cool. Maybe I'll do some black and white stripes up here. And one of the most important things for this is to draw big. If you draw a pattern that's super teeny tiny, we're going to lose that contrast. We want to draw big shapes so that we have places where we have a lot of black next to a lot of white. That's what makes it very contrasty. So here, maybe I want to do some, maybe some diamonds. All right, now I gotta pick another one for over here. Maybe I will do some of my favorite lines, the wave line, but I'll have some that are going upside down. So I'll have one part that's white and one part that's black. That might look super cool. All right, I got one more. Let's see. Maybe we'll do some squares. All right. Now it's time for our favorite part, to trace